The political theater is heating up in the US. CPI numbers come in lower than expected. Globally, tensions are rising as the weaponization of debt continues. The Japanese yen gets a last-minute bailout again. Meanwhile, in Bitcoin land, the German government is nearly finished emptying their bags, while the Bitcoin ETFs are quietly heating up and have had 5 straight days of inflows. Welcome to Bitcoin Daily. I'm Dante Cook, head of Swan Business. So we're going to try a new format here today. We're going to give you an entire week of Bitcoin news in a single, simple, and short format. Let's get into it. The US election race continues to be full of political theater, as President Biden calls his Vice President, Donald Trump, and his Eastern ally, Zelensky, Vladimir Putin.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be Vice President, but I think she was not qualified to be President. So let's start there. And now I want to hand it over to the President of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. We're going to beat President Putin.
On the other side of the aisle, Republicans like Donald Trump are now headline speakers at major Bitcoin conferences. The Republican Party also made Bitcoin and crypto a major part of their platform moving forward, touting Bitcoin's freedom qualities. Check out this video here from Republican Senator Lummis.
No central bank digital currency. I'm so happy about that because that's a means of surveillance of the American people. But we want to make sure people can have individual wallets for their Bitcoin so they have that sovereign over their own money. We know we want the US dollar to remain strong. And actually having Bitcoin in reserve can help the US dollar remain strong.
Inflation cools off as it hits 3%, well below expectations and forecasts. Although there is some conflicting evidence that prices are starting to rise in certain parts of the economy, as the Producer Price Index, or PPI, continues to rise slightly and is being revised upwards. Overall, it feels as though that inflation is starting to cool, although it hasn't gone away. Global debt continues to be a problem, and the weaponization of that debt continues to be something to create more tension between countries. Earlier this week, Saudi Arabia threatened to sell European treasuries or European debt if they seized Russia's assets another time. Speaking of sovereign treasury debts, the largest holder of the United States Treasury debt is Japan. And again, the Japanese yen needed intervention and needed saving from collapse as it dropped to its lowest level against the United States dollar in 38 years. If the Japanese yen becomes too weak against the dollar, then there's a possibility that they would have to sell treasuries in order to strengthen their currency. A weak currency doesn't bode well for Japan, but the selling of treasuries doesn't bode well for the United States. The U.S. debt problem is front and center, as current Fed Chair Jerome Powell says that the U.S. fiscal path is unsustainable.
Back in February, you were on 60 Minutes, and you said the U.S. budget deficit, the national debt are unsustainable. Do you still view that the U.S. is on an unsustainable fiscal path?
I do. I think I tried to be clear that the level of the U.S. debt is not itself unsustainable, but the path that we're on is unsustainable, and I think that is not controversial.
Amidst all the bad news, ETFs had a great week as they had 5 straight days of inflows. Nearly all of the Bitcoin that was sold off by Germany, which was 50,000 Bitcoin, was gobbled up by the ETFs. Based upon the history of the UK, Germany may be making a critical blunder. The UK, between 1999 and 2002, sold most of its gold at $275 an ounce. Today, the price of an ounce of gold is over $2,400 per ounce. So, why would you sell a hard asset for something that you can print out of thin air? El Salvador's Bitcoin office took advantage by calling out this blunder, saying that they now have more wealth than Germany. Speaking of the UK banks are now reportedly denying things like Bitcoin as a source of funds to get a mortgage. Even if you sell the Bitcoin into a local currency, they're still not accepting it. Bitcoin adoption in the UK continues to be slow, as banking restrictions are making it hard for people to use, buy, hold, and sell Bitcoin. In other news, we surpassed 7 years of this guy holding up a sign that said buy Bitcoin in one of Janet Yellen's Senate hearings. And so that's a pretty quick recap of the week. But let me give you one thought as we head into the weekend. Late last week, Bitcoin ended a streak of 427 days without a 25% correction. And so, undoubtedly, this leads people to be a little bit overconfident. We've always talked about the volatility of Bitcoin, both upward and downward. And so the market has probably been overly optimistic with Bitcoin hitting all-time highs before the halving and having such good run up at the beginning of this year, when the liquidity in the global markets hasn't actually been on. We continue to talk about Bitcoin being the great absorber of liquidity, as coined by Dr. Jeff Ross. And as you can see, M2 money supply has been in a downward trend since Q1 of 2021. The M2, or the global monetary liquidity supply, looks to be turning back on and flipping positive. And this is incredibly bullish for Bitcoin. There is an incredibly strong correlation with Bitcoin's price reaching all-time highs and ripping to higher highs and higher lows when the liquidity, or the M2 supply, turns back on. And so right now, it's okay that the market is chopping sideways. It's perfectly normal and perfectly rational. So, until that money printer turns back on, stay humble, stack sats, and have a good weekend. We're signing off for the day. This is Dante Cook with Swan.com. Happy stacking.